When talking about creepy music in video games, there are few tracks more iconic than the theme from Lavender Town in Pokemon Red and Blue. The games themselves saw unprecedented success for their time, but the theme from Lavender Town in particular took on a whole new life with the rise of the internet. Eventually, rumors began to circulate about the song causing headaches, confusion, insomnia, and even death in children that heard it. While these rumors of the so-called Lavender Town Syndrome are verifiably false, the song itself does have an undeniable eeriness about it that makes it easy to see why it became the target of creepypasta writers. So what exactly makes it sound so creepy? Before talking about the Lavender Town theme itself, I think it's important to understand the context surrounding it, both within the game and in real life. First and foremost, it's important to acknowledge the nature of video game music at the time. The first generation of Pokemon games were released for the original Game Boy, which came with harsh restrictions in basically every aspect of programming. However, the part that's relevant to the discussion at hand is the system's audio limitations. The Game Boy only has 4 audio channels. In layman's terms, this means that it can only make 4 sounds at any given time. I won't go into what makes each of them unique here, but know that one of them is a noise channel, used for percussion and sound effects, meaning that only 3 of the channels are capable of producing actual melodic and harmonic content. Furthermore, memory in early video games was extremely limited, so music was designed to be relatively short, but able to loop endlessly. This is true for almost all video games, but is especially prevalent in those for early systems, such as the Game Boy or NES. As for its place within the story of the game, Lavender Town is home to the Pokemon Tower, a cemetery for deceased Pokemon. Characters in and around the town make reference to ghost sightings, and some of the ones found within the tower can even be seen grieving. Also found within the tower is the mysterious Channeler Trainer class, as well as the only ghost-type Pokemon found in Kanto, Ghastly and Haunter. Even ghosts of regular, non-ghost type Pokemon can be found there too, including the ghost of a Marowak that blocks your progress within the tower. All of this serves to create an air of creepiness around the town, really selling the idea that it's haunted. So how does Lavender Town's music support that feeling of eeriness? Well, it's not supersonic frequencies that make your brain go haywire, as creepypasta writers would have you believe. The real answer is actually a lot more believable, and can be boiled down to just a single word: dissonance. In simple terms, dissonance is what happens when notes just don't mesh together well. You could say they don't sound good together, but I'm not a fan of phrasing it that way. Dissonance can be used to create a variety of moods, both positive and negative. In fact, most music is based around moving from dissonance to consonance, creating a phenomenon we call resolution. Using dissonance to create tension before resolving it creates music that is satisfying and pleasant to listen to. However, by lingering on dissonance and forgoing resolution, we can make music that sounds uneasy, unsettling, or even, as is the case with Lavender Town, outright creepy. Now let's take a closer look at how Lavender Town uses dissonance. The song opens with a simple 4-note melodic motif that repeats throughout the entire piece. A motif that repeats in this way is called an ostinato. Traditionally speaking, they tend to repeat exactly throughout a piece, with no variation whatsoever. Therefore, ostinati tend to clash with harmonies, since they often create dissonant intervals between certain notes. While this clashing with the ostinato is the source of plenty of dissonance within Lavender Town's theme, there is also dissonance to be found within the ostinato itself. Let me show you what I mean. The ostinato opens on a C, which moves up a perfect fifth to G. Perfect fifths are among the most consonant of all intervals, so we haven't found any dissonance yet. However, it then moves up to a B. Although B is only a major third above G, which is a consonant interval, it is also a major seventh above, or minor second below, C, which is a dissonant interval. It then moves downward, landing on an F sharp. F sharp is a perfect fourth below B, which is consonant, but it's also a minor second below G, and tritone away from C. Tritones are often considered to be the most dissonant interval there is, because they are as far away as two notes can be from one another. So, even though the ostinato only contains melodic content within itself, it implies dissonant harmonies by moving between notes at dissonant intervals. Now let's look at the rest of the piece, as well as how the ostinato interacts with it. I think now is a good time to talk about the key that the piece is in, or rather, what mode it's in. Modes are a bit tricky to explain concisely, but to keep things simple, I'll just say that you can think of them as variations of major and minor scales. These variations are made by changing one of the notes that appears within the scale. As for Lavender Town, to determine the mode it uses, we have to use a little bit of interpretation. Many people may see it as being in E minor, which is fair since most of the notes from E minor appear. However, I choose to interpret it as being in C Lydian instead, because C is more emphasized in the piece's melody and harmony. C is the first note that appears in the ostinato, meaning it sees a lot of emphasis there due to the constant repetition. It's also the note that the main melody resolves to, so it's emphasized there as well. Furthermore, the ostinato harmonizes with the other parts in such a way that forms a C major triad at the beginning of each phrase. This level of emphasis, in my opinion, is more than enough to interpret the piece as being in C Lydian rather than E minor. Lydian scales are derived from major scales, and are identical except that, in Lydian, the fourth scale degree is made sharp. In this case, the note that turns C major into C Lydian is that F sharp from earlier. Lydian scales are often described as having a floaty, almost ethereal feel, which is appropriate for the theme of a town inhabited by ghosts. Let's look closer at the melody now. The piece is made up of just two closely related phrases. The first opens on a G, the fifth of C major, and then drops down to E, the third. It then moves back to G, and walks down once again to E, making sure to hit that dissonant F sharp in between. It then leaps up to B, the leading tone of C, but then falls all the way down to D flat, coming just short of the tonic. This is an example of the piece foregoing resolution, as I mentioned before. It leads us to believe that it will resolve to C, but then subverts that expectation by landing on D flat. Not only does this rob us of the resolution, but the note it lands on is also a minor second away from the C we expect it to land on, creating another example of dissonance. Furthermore, D flat could be considered a flattening of the second scale degree of C, and therefore interpreted as a brief modulation to C Phrygian, a mode considered to be dark, mysterious, and gloomy. By combining the etherealness of Lydian with the gloominess of Phrygian, Lavender Town creates an atmosphere that is both eerie and mysterious. The second phrase is similar to the first. It starts the same, on G, but then steps down a minor second to F sharp rather than leaping all the way down to E. The next bar features a similar motion to the walk down in the first phrase, but instead moves from B to G to F sharp and then back to B, placing more emphasis on it before resolving to C. While this is technically a resolution, its impact is lessened by the clashing tones in the ostinato, allowing Lavender Town to maintain its eerie, discordant nature. Those two phrases make up the core melodic idea of the piece. They, along with the ostinato, use up two of the three pitched voices the Game Boy is capable of producing. The third voice is primarily used to support the piece by adding a sort of counter melody. While it largely appears in the same register as the melody, the function it serves is more similar to that of bass, and so I'll be referring to it as such. For the majority of the piece, the third voice plays this repeating bass line. Nothing too complex, and nothing too dissonant. However, when the second phrase of the melody repeats, the bass drops out, and is replaced by these shrill tones in the upper register. This figure is identical to the third measure of the second phrase of the melody, except that it starts an octave above. It repeats 3 times, each time playing an octave above the last until it approaches the edge of human hearing. I believe this part was the inspiration behind those rumors of a so-called Lavender Town Syndrome. However, while it is uncomfortable to listen to, I wouldn't go as far as to call it dangerous. As I mentioned before, the notes in this figure are borrowed from part of the melody. These notes are B, G, F sharp, as well as another B. The B and F sharp are especially discordant because they clash against notes in both the melody and ostinato. The B clashes against the C from the ostinato, creating a minor second, as does the F sharp, which clashes with the G in the melody. Then, in the next bar, the G in the ornamental figure clashes with the F sharp in the melody, creating that same minor second interval, but the notes producing it appear in opposite parts. On the third bar of the phrase, the figures are identical, other than being separated by several octaves. On the fourth bar, the shrill voice drops out and is replaced once again by the bass, which plays this figure, featuring an E, G, F sharp, and B. The F sharp and B both clash strongly with the C, creating both minor second and tritone intervals. These dissonant intervals appear when the melody has otherwise resolved. In other words, even when the song should have concluded and achieved a sense of peace or rest, there's still something about it that just doesn't feel quite right. The resolution is almost soiled or incomplete. Finally, the next measure sees the melody line drop out, leaving only the bass and ostinato, and setting the entire piece up to repeat. Even though this is perfectly conventional for video game music, I see it as especially poetic when it comes to Lavender Town. To me, the lack of a satisfying resolution, combined with being destined to repeat endlessly, feels very emblematic of restless spirits, condemned to walk the mortal realm forever. Maybe I'm looking too deep into it, but even if I am, seeing things that aren't really there is half the fun of telling ghost stories. Thanks for watching, and happy Halloween.